Last year I came to a decision. I decided that I wanted to buy myself a nice Flieger watch. At the time I had a really good affordable Flieger and I really liked it and I wore it so much that I made the decision that I actually wanted to upgrade, spend some more money and get a better quality version of the Flieger. And after a fairly short amount of time of considering how much money I was available to have to spend, but also what was available, I came down to a short list of two watches. I came down to a watch from Laco and a watch from Stowa. It then, unfortunately, became very difficult to figure out which of those two watches that I was going to choose. Hello, you're watching James. My name is James, you're watching me, and I'm talking about two watches today. Two watches that I was seriously considering purchasing, two watches that I struggled to figure out which one I wanted to buy. Now, I ended up buying the Stowa. I ended up buying this one after watching lots of reviews, after looking at lots of pictures, but I always had that lagging feeling in the back of my mind, should I possibly have bought the Laco Pro instead? The problem I had is that I came down to this decision of two watches rather quickly, but the problem I really had was, well, I don't get to have hands-on experience with both of them before actually buying one. So which one should I choose? It was difficult. I struggled with that purchasing decision because I wanted to buy the correct watch. And I've always been very happy with my purchase, but I've always wondered, should I have bought this one instead? So it's been really great when Laco actually reached out to me. They'd seen that I'd done some reviews of Fliegers, they'd seen me talk about the Stowa, and they said, hey, would you like to borrow a watch from us? Would you like to borrow the Pro so that you can do a comparison with the Stowa? And I said, oh, yes, please, that would be great. So this is not a sponsored video. I unfortunately have to send this Laco back, but I am very thankful to Laco for putting their watch out so I can actually get some hands-on experience with it. And they specifically wanted me to do a comparison, which is what I would have wanted to do anyway. So it shows that they actually want their watches to be compared. So it's a nice thing to see from a company. They're not just wanting some nice positive review. They're saying, hey, here, borrow a watch, put it up against other watches, give your viewers your sort of thoughts. So today, I'm going to do a couple of things. Firstly, I am going to do that side by side, put them next to each other, show you the differences, the similarities, but then we're going to try and answer a question. I'm going to try and answer the question of, did I make the right decision? Did buying the Stowa end up being the right idea, or should I have actually bought this one? Let's put these watches side by side now, and then we'll come back and try and answer that question. So rather than put these watches head to head to say which is better than the other in different categories and adding them all up, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just going to show you the similarities and the differences between these two watches and then come back and give my final thoughts. And I'm going to do that because I actually think both of these watches are fantastic. There are some differences and there are some similarities, but I don't think it's actually worth doing a which is better on a scale because I just don't think that really will add up to what I'm trying to achieve in this video. So stick with me and let me show you these watches and show you the similarities and differences and then come back to me and then sort of make a decision about did I make the right choice. But the first thing that is worth considering about these two watches is the prices of them. Now I'm going to list the prices directly from the websites. Taxes may change depending on where you buy from. Shipping might change from where you buy from, but let's keep it simple because the Stowa is listed at 1,067 euros. The Laco is actually 200 euros less at 850 euros. That's actually a bit of a difference in price, more than I actually thought about when I was initially thinking about these two watches. I thought they were a little bit closer together. So for that 200 extra euros, is the Stowa going to end up justifying that price? So I'll come back to that, of course. But let's talk about the packaging quickly and then get on to some more important things. The Stowa came in this wooden box made in the Black Forest. Very simple, sort of like a composite material. The watch was presented there with some information, and that's about it. It came in a much bigger box as well, but that was just outer packaging. This was actually the main part of the box. The Laco actually presented probably a little bit better because it came in this outer box and a nice big inner box with a zip. Has a nice soft feel to it. And then the watch was presented just like that. So of course, when you put these watches side by side, the first thing that is going to stand out to you is that they are a very similar design. And of course they are a very similar design because they are both Type B Fliegers. Similarities obviously that they're all printed. They both have heat blued sort of pilot style hands. They both have a nice long white second hand. The counterbalances are a little bit different, however, on that second hand. The Stowa has a sort of more of a solid sort of diamond shape, whereas that Laco has a little sort of maybe a little hole in the side of it. So it just is a tiny bit different. Don't notice too much. The Stowa comes available with a date and without a date. I chose to go for the date when I bought mine. The Laco, I think, doesn't have the date option. But you'll see the differences on there is that Laco is printed and made in Germany is also printed down the bottom, whereas the Stowa doesn't have any printing on it whatsoever. I think there is an option that you can have Stowa on there, but I chose not to go with that. Now for me, I actually prefer it fairly sterile, this particular sort of style, but I really quite like the made in Germany down there at the base of that dial. I think that looks quite cool, and Stowa does not have that option. The next thing that's really worth considering with these two watches is the size of them, because they are similar size watches except for one key point. Let's talk about the similarities first, because both of the cases are 40 millimeters. Both have 20 millimeter lug width. They actually have a fairly similar lug to lug as well, because the Stowa is 48 millimeters and the Laco is just a tiny bit smaller at 47 millimeters. But it's when you turn these watches on their sides that you notice a bit of a differences in the sizes. The Stowa is actually only 9 millimeters tall, whereas the Laco is 11.5 millimeters tall. Now this is quite interesting because I think both of those measurements are quite amazing. The Laco, if you hold it and wear it, that thickness, that height of that watch is very nice and it feels quite right for this watch. It's a nice thickness of watch. The only thing is when you have both of these watches in hand, you really notice just how thin the Stowa is. 9 millimeters is a thin watch, and it is noticeable when you put these watches side by side, but it's also very noticeable when you're wearing it. Any watch I noticed that is sort of under 10 millimeters has a real interesting extra wrist feel. I just noticed that I sort of keep looking and going, wow, that's very, very thin. So that is definitely one of the big differences between these two watches. Both watches actually have really good lume. I don't think there's that much of a difference between the two. Certainly sort of nothing that really stands out to me when I put these watches side by side after they've all been charged up and showing off that lume. Both have a very nice sapphire crystal. I think the Laco is a little bit more sort of a domed. You'll see there's a very, very slight doming, whereas the Stowa has a little bit of a less of a dome. I think there is a slight dome, but it feels a little bit more flat, which probably adds a little bit to that thickness, but not a lot, because if you look at the Laco, it is only a very, very slight. I have to say that they are both really nice crystals, however, and similar sort of AR coatings. You sort of don't notice too much of a difference between them when it comes to that. They are both just nicely presented, covering those dials. Now both of these watches come in an automatic and manual version. I chose manual when I bought my Stowa, so I asked Laco to send me their equivalent manual as well. I just feel it suits this style of watch. They both contain the Sleater SW210, however there are different grades between them. The Stowa, as you can see, is all decorated. It has heat blued screws. It is sort of the top grade Sleater movement, whereas the Laco has gone for more of a simple version of it. Effectively, they are the same movements, but they just look a little bit different. The Stowa does look a little bit prettier, and I do actually quite enjoy looking at it, but realistically, very similar movements, the base movements anyway. But because they are different variations of that movement, or at least different grades of that movement, it would be interesting to see how they are performing, or at least the differences in the performance between the two movements. So let's start with the Stowa. High beat movement, virtually no beat error, nice healthy amplitude, running at plus 5 seconds a day. Let's see how that compares with the Laco. Well, that's a good set of figures as well. Tiny little bit more beat error, healthier or higher amplitude, and running at 0. So even better than the high grade Sleater in my Stowa. But both have good results. I'd say they're in that same sort of range. Now let's look a little bit more at the actual case back, because you'll see the Stowa with that more decorated movement is a screw on with all those independent screws. But what you might see is also it's very flat. It almost feels like it sort of dips in a little bit, which helps with that sort of very thin aspect. It has a very nice sort of feel on wrist sort of case back. I really like how it presents this particular watch. The Laco actually has a screw on case back, and you'll see that it does bulge up and out a little bit more, giving this watch a little bit more thickness, but it's well presented, presents that movement nicely as well, and has all that information on the back of the watch too. So putting those case backs side by side, you can really sort of see the difference that the different case back makes. When you actually look at the case finishing themselves, they are both all brushed. They have a very similar case shape too. The Laco has this engraving FL23883 on the side, whereas the Stowa doesn't have that. When you put the sort of the quality of the brushing side by side, I'm going to say that the Stowa is slightly better, only marginally however. The Laco actually presents very nicely, but the Stowa is probably just a little bit more refined. Now the shape of the crowns are a little bit different. The Laco has probably more of a traditional sort of pilot style, whereas the Stowa has more of that onion crown. But the big difference is the Laco is a screw down crown, whereas this is just a push-pull crown. And that affects the water resistance quite a lot, because the Stowa is only 50 meters water resistance, but that screw down crown and that screw on case back gives the Laco 200 meters of water resistance. Now initially when I bought my Stowa, I was a little bit sort of disappointed in the strap. Not the quality is outstanding, but I kind of just wanted the more traditional style that the Laco comes with. Having had this now over a year, I've actually really warmed up to this and I really, really love it. But I have to say, between the two, they're just different styles. This is much softer. It really does feel soft from the minute you sort of pick it out of the case and start wearing it. Whereas this one does feel like you are going to have to wear it in a little bit. It's a little bit thicker and chunkier, but they're both full leather, both good quality. I know that this one, if you wore it a lot, it would really sort of then meld to your wrist and be nice. The hardware, I think, on the Stowa is better. It just definitely stands out as a nicer set of hardware. The Laco is probably a little bit more simple, but still nice, still fits in with the watch. It just sort of has both sort of a very pilot style to it, but I think the Stowa just went for a very sort of a different style with that color. Underneath you can see that they are riveted in. This one has the metal keeper as well, whereas this one, it just does feel like it's a little bit more traditional. They went for the more traditional style. I personally like both. I think they're both nice. This one's just a different color, a little bit softer. This one's a bit more traditional and just going to take a little bit more to wear in. The Stowa is probably one of the most comfortable and nicest on-wrist experience watches that I have in my collection. And I think a big part of that comes to the thickness of the watch. It's also a very nice size watch and the strap is very nice. So I have to say, I really, really enjoy wearing this one and it fits perfectly on my 17cm wrist. The Laco also has a nice on-wrist feel. That strap is nice and I know it will wear in and feel really lovely. The dimensions of this watch are really good, pretty much the same as the Stowa, except for the thickness, obviously. I've mentioned that a couple of times, and I'm going to mention it a couple of times in regards to, I wouldn't have even mentioned it in regards to the Laco. It's only because I'm putting the watches side by side that you then notice that there is that significant sort of thickness difference. And that brings me to the question that I really wanted to answer. Did I pick the right watch? Well, let's get back to me and let me try and answer that question for you. So I thought after having these two watches, it would then be an easy sort of thought of, yes, I bought the right watch, or should have bought the Laco. But that's actually not how it's turned out. These watches are very comparable. In fact, these watches are both great, and if you chose to buy one over the other, I very much doubt you would be disappointed in your watch choice. However, having the opportunity to get hands-on with them, I've really realized that there are three significant differences between them. Firstly is the price. Secondly is the decoration of the movement. Third is the thickness of the watch. Now the decoration of the movement is very nice on the Stowa, but realistically, it doesn't change my on-wrist experience with them. So let's put that one aside. The thickness of this watch, that is a big difference. However, I would not have noticed that difference if I wasn't putting the watches side by side. The Laco is not a thick watch. It's just slightly thick when you compare it against the Stowa. I think now that I've had these watches in hand, on wrist, and I've put them next to each other, I think it actually comes down to one thing, and that is the price of these watches, because the price difference between them is around 200 euros. And 200 euros is enough to make it a difference of choice between these two watches. It's not a small amount where it doesn't really matter. It's large enough that I think it puts them into slightly different categories of price. And that's where I think it comes down to for me. I think if you've got around the 800 euros and that's how much you're comfortable to spend on a Flieger, buy the Laco. If, however, you have around 1,000 euros and you're comfortable spending 1,000 euros on a Flieger, buy the Stowa. Simple as that. When I bought these watches, I had around 1,000 euros to spend, so I bought the Stowa, so I think I made the right choice. However, I don't think it would have been a good choice to stretch myself to 1,000 euros if I only was comfortable with 100. But I also don't think it would have been a good choice to save 200 euros to go from the Stowa back to the Laco. So it's as simple as that. If you're comparing these two watches, if you're deciding between these two watches, if I was watching this video before I chose myself, I think the simple advice is, if you're comfortable with 100 euros and you're not willing to stretch yourself, because I don't think you really should stretch yourself, buy the Laco. If you've got 1,000 euros, don't bother saving money to buy the Laco, buy the Stowa. Simple as that. And if you really like Flieger watches, if you really like pilot watches, well, you might like these videos next.